Hey guys, and set number 2 this week. So we're in Acts 17 for this one. This week I've done a little bit different. I'm just pulling out some of the facts from each of the chapters with a little bit of spiritual twist in there, because there's a lot to get through in this, and you're not going to be able to take all of it in at once. So let's get a bit of the history and then look at a theme that exists there. So in chapter 17 is kind of how to preach Christ's gospel. What is the best way to do this? From any class you're going to teach, what can you learn from this chapter about how to teach Jesus, really? How to teach about Jesus, how to teach his gospel. So we read here that Paul and Silas, again, great missionary companionship. They preach in a bunch of places: Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, and on Mars Hill, which we'll get to. But in verse 2 we see, and Paul, as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the Scriptures. He teaches from the Scriptures, and we need to teach from the Scriptures. There is no better teaching tool than from the Scriptures. We can pull in amazing conference talks, those are also Scriptures, but we don't need a ton of different quotes from different books that don't actually have a whole lot to do with this. We need this, and to look at this and not overanalyze it too much, but also put it into context of time and language differerences and those kind of things. But the best way to learn Christ and to teach Christ is to teach from the Scriptures. There's some wonderful books out there. There are, but nothing better than Christ's words himself, right? Or words of the prophets. Nothing better. Start with Jesus and things will follow after that. And a lot of times in our church, I notice that we teach things like celestial marriage. We teach things like keeping the commandments. We teach things like the articles of faith, and we focus on that. And we forget to bring Jesus in first, because that's the whole reason for any of those things. Jesus first, all the other things flow afterwards. So if you're teaching, make sure that Jesus is included in that lesson. If you're giving a talk, make sure Jesus is included in your talk, because the whole point of going to church is Jesus. And we are the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So if we're having lessons and talks and other things and leaving Jesus out of it, kind of missing the point. So do that. And then also in verse 4, you'll see there that there was a great multitude, including chief women, not a few. So there was a lot of women that had influence and power in the community, because the Greeks were like that. They were very matriarchal, patriarchal. There was different kind of culture. The Greek women were, revered as well, much like in Egypt, women were important as well. So there was a lot of them around, and they were getting there as well. Now, you also go on to read about a guy called Jason, because that's where they were staying, and they thought, the Jews in the area didn't like this, of course, so they went into Jason, and they start making bad of his family, because they wanted to get Paul and Silas, and eventually they let him go. So that's in there as well. So then they go and teach on Mars Hill. Now, Mars Hill was the ancient place for pretty much social media. It had a name, which I don't know that I wrote down. Did I write it down? Probably not. There is a hill, though. It is called something else. But they go and preach from that. And it was just called Mars's Hill, because Mars was like the god of debate and war, and that was their god that did that. And so that was the place for debating and asking, sharing, and so it's like a ancient social media site where you'd go there, and that would be where you're like, hey, I heard this, and everyone would comment, and they'd say, oh, I like that, and other people would say, no, that's totally wrong, here's my opinion. So that was kind of the place for that. So they're up there preaching, and they have a lot of good success in that, do really, really well. And then they go into Athens, and they talk to, there's a whole lot of things they go on and do there. But Paul shows that he's well studied and able to teach at all levels. He can teach to the very basics, or he can teach to the leaders in the synagogues. He can do both, just like Jesus did. A bedrock of understanding of the doctrine of Christ, and knowing how to share it. He was a seeker of truth. And we see this Mars Hill incident specifically in verse 22. It says Mars Hill. And he's talking in Athens. And he says, I perceive that in all things you're too superstitious. So you're too worried about all these different gods. And he says in verse 23, for as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, Whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, and declare I unto you, God hath made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth. He giveth to all life and breathe and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth. And then in 27 he says, and they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him, and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. In other words, he's not far. Seek him, you're going to find him. So he was just up there preaching. That's what he was preaching. But question comes up, what do you know about God? And how to teach Christ's gospel. There's two of these things here. So teach from the scriptures, start with Jesus, and remember all things will flow after that, but make sure you include Jesus to begin with, because that is the main point. People will hate and persecute you, but don't fear, Christ is with you. It doesn't matter what setting you're in. Even if you're in a church setting with other wonderful church members, sometimes what you say is not going to go down well. I taught Sunday school last week, and even in Release Society I will find this, but I taught Sunday school, and there was one brother there that I brought up a point that the class loved. Like, I had a class of maybe 30, just over. Everyone but him loved it, and he was like, oh, no, that hasn't happened to me. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry that you haven't experienced that yet. One day you will. He's like, no, I won't. He was just really against that idea. So people are still going to persecute you, but don't fear, Christ is with you. If the Spirit prompts you to say that, you go with that. Be careful with what you say and how you word it too. But the fact that everybody else was nodding and going, yes, I've experienced that, he was just, I think, just a bit in a bad place that day maybe. But not everyone's going to agree with you all the time. So don't worry about that. Christ is with you. You're all good. There are pockets of people so ready for the gospel. So the gospel message, so keep looking, because here they find they're going around and they're persecuted here and they're thrown out of here, and then they'll find this town and there's hundreds of people going, yes, we've been waiting for you. So there's pockets of people everywhere. Even now today on the earth, there are pockets of people. As I said last week, Africa's having a huge boom, and it's so beautiful to see on social media, all the missionaries over there dealing with the beautiful people of the different nations of Africa, and it's just huge. And they've been waiting for so long for these sweet messages to come through. They're good Christian people already, and they're like, but there's more to this, and now more is coming in, and they're going, yes. So just, really awesome to see that still exists today. It existed then, still exists today. And we know our God. Like verse 23, he's not an unknown God. We know him. We are his children. Excuse me. So what does it mean to you that you are his offspring? What does that mean to you? That you're a child of God? Does that make you different? Does that make you feel different? If you really embrace that you're a child of heavenly parents, how does it make you feel? And how is being his child different than just being a creation of his? Because if you're just a creation of his, you're kind of like a carbon copy. Like, he created trees and animals, and like, well, animals have personalities. They can look the same. Humans can look the same too, but we are each individually belonging to him. We have like godly DNA that comes from him. Our physical DNA comes from our physical parents, but our spirits have that godly DNA, and that makes the difference. It's different than just a tree or a mountain or some grass. As beautiful as that is, it's a whole different thing. We are spirit children of heavenly parents, and it's a beautiful thing to be that, and it means so much more than just being a creation. Speaks to our self-worth and our motivation in life, and perhaps our life goals or what we want to do. It really does change things. So how does this change how you see yourself and how you see others? If you can look at yourself and you can look at others and see them as children of heavenly parents, just like you are, your respect for others goes up, your respect for yourself goes up, your self-confidence builds. You're no longer easily torn down by someone's comment, because you're like, I'm a child of God. I'm not worthless. I'm worth a lot. He loves me. He has great care for me. And it means a lot, especially to those of us whose fathers weren't really around. So, it's pretty cool. So, how to preach Christ's gospel. That's kind of what this talks about. You see the success there, and you see the reasons why. And there you go. So, that's chapter 17. Hang around. We're going to go look at chapter 18. I'll see you guys there.